But of course, the working class has no interest in oppressing any worker anywhere in the world, and we have a stake in making sure there isn't a third world war.
So wait, you're telling me that I've been lied to, and it's not Russian trolls online that are attacking our democracy?
No, I think every time there's social opposition in America, including the auto workers, it's got to be the Putin and the Russians that are behind it, of course.
I want to push back a little bit, just to play devil's advocate, because if you speak with some UAW committeemen or this and that, they say to folks like you know, it's a lot more complicated. You know, there's a lot of layers, and the UAW has won certain concessions for transfer rights and things like that. I know what I know what I don't know. So I ask you, is there some good that the UAW is doing, or in general have they been, excuse my French, collaborating and bending over for GM? And it's not just GM, many other companies too.
It's the latter. Okay. There's no question that they're giving up every right. We were just covering a case of a terrible tragedy involving a young man at the Woodhaven stamping plant, Jacoby Hennings. He was 20 years old. He was a temporary worker. And in fact, he was working 2 different temporary jobs, one at Chrysler and one at Ford, in order to make ends meet. He had a grievance about the conditions inside the plant and went in to speak to the union officials. He was in their offices for an hour. And supposedly, in the course of that, they claim he committed suicide. And, but it was a very tense condition. He was well known to be an outspoken spokesperson against the conditions inside of this plant. We don't believe that what the union has said has been true at all. In fact, the family has not been able to get the full story about what happened inside that plant. So you want to ask about the conditions inside the plant facing workers every day. They're told to go along with what you are doing because there's a lot of other people out there who will come in and do the same job. And the conditions have deteriorated enormously inside the plants. On the basic grievance levels, on every level. And so the argument that, well, they're working behind the scenes and they're trying to do this and that and the other, many workers would give a very artful phrase, you know, to explain what they really think about the union and its policies.
What phrase is that?
We're on.
Well,
I mean, it's the internet. You can say what you want.
By the way, in terms of transfer rights, I mean, this is nonsense. They're telling workers to uproot their families from Detroit. Some of them have to move as far away as Arlington, Texas, or Tennessee, or Kentucky to retain a job. How are you supposed to do that when you have family and uproot? And in many cases, this is not the first time workers were uprooted. There's something called the GM gypsies, because it's happened to people so many times. You can uproot your family, and then your factory can be the next to close. So in terms of any rights that are left, it's not because of the UAW, it's because of what was fought for by an earlier generation, including the Flint sit-down strike. Yesterday was the 82nd anniversary of the end of the 44-day sit-down strike, when workers seized the property of the largest corporation in the planet in a city where there were ordinances passed that if more than 2 workers were on a corner, they could be arrested for, quote, bunching, where General Motors had industrial spies and thugs to beat workers up. And it was underground work to organize the sit-down strike. And that was a heroic struggle. The union, the UAW, long ago spit upon those traditions. By the way, those were the traditions that were fought for by the socialists who built the UAW. In the 1940s and early 50s, Walter Reuther carried out a vicious purge of the UAW, tied it to the Democratic Party, and prevented any, and tried to root out of the UAW it's those traditions that were behind its building, And today, as Larry said, the UAW doesn't even hide that it's a partner with management. It boasts about it. Everything is UAW Ford, UAW GM, and so on. An earlier generation would roll over in its grave,
And something that the more I talk to people, it seems to me that General Motors, these other automakers' calculation is China, double down, because the Chinese government gives people subsidies for electric cars, something we should be doing a lot more of. So they see more profit in China. It seems like they've been doubling down on trying to sell in China and other countries.
Well, China right now is actually a larger car market than the United States is. So all of the automakers, whether it was GM, Ford, or Renault and others, flooded in. But of course, since China is connected up to the world economy, which is now once again entering into a slowdown. There's also the impact of the tariffs. There's an economic slowdown in China as well, and auto workers are losing their jobs in China as well. Mm-hmm. So this is, they have a global strategy. They shift production anywhere in the world to try to find the cheapest sources of labor. And the unions, which are rooted in nationalism, had no progressive answer to the development of globalization in the late 70s and early 80s. What was their answer? Telling workers their enemies were the Japanese and working with the employers to cut labor costs to try to attract finance capital here. And the German unions do the same thing. The British unions do the same thing. So this is why the whole perspective of nationalism of the trade unions is completely reactionary, and why an international and global strategy of the working class is needed.
And when you talk about the Flint sit-down strikes, 1937, the minimal research I've done, it's, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he didn't send in the National Guard to stop it. He let things play out. The governor of Michigan at the time, it seems, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't sending in wasn't trying to shut it down immediately. In today's day and age with a general strike, we live in a police state. I was at Standing Rock. You have police basically, battering people with rubber bullets and tear gas and all this in protection of a private oil company. So when you talk about a general strike, do you think in this kind of capitalist corporate system that workers could freely strike?
Well, they did attack the workers in Flint. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, it was a famous case where they came in with gas, throwing in gas bombs and so forth and so on. They began breaking out windows in order to get the air out so that people wouldn't be suffocating within the plant. It was not true. When the National Guard did come, there was the danger that they returned against the workers. There's no question about it. The governor at that time was afraid of an explosive development taking place within the Detroit and Flint area. If you recall, in 1934, there were 3 major general strikes in America. Toledo, auto light strike, and a lot of workers from Toledo came up to Flint to assist the workers there. The Minneapolis general strike, which was led actually by the Trotskyists and the over-the-road drivers, and in San Francisco. So we're talking about an explosive period of struggles on the part of the working class that if they had called in a National Guard to come in and attack those workers, there's no question about it that this country would have gone up. So it wasn't a measure to, because it was in fact because they were afraid of an explosion taking place that they backtracked on those issues. Without the independent movement of the working class, nothing would have happened in terms of the struggle taking place among the workers in the CIO. I do want to go back to what's happening today, because there are many lessons, and we're talking today really at a higher level than we were in the 1930s. The class struggle has been suppressed for the last 30 years, not just in America. This has been an international phenomenon. And as Jerry was saying, that the answer of all the unions internationally has been to make alliances with their corporations and to promote nationalism. This may sound a little bit afield, but I think this is appropriate. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was considered to be socialist, which it never was. It was, in fact, a socialist revolution, but you had a bureaucracy which came to power, usurped power from the workers, and you had the development of Stalinism. But when it collapsed, it was said that this is somehow going to lead to more peace. It was going to be and so forth and so on throughout the world. just the opposite. You've had more wars than you've had in any other period in history since 1992. But what it also signaled, and the reason why the Soviet Union collapsed, is because of the nationalism of its own policies within the period of globalization. We concluded from that development that it was really the death knell of nationalism on a world scale, of all the organizations based on the working class, and especially the trade unions, and they could not provide an orientation for the working class. And that the only solution would be for the working class to begin to unite on a global scale, and that in fact the struggles that we'll be developing would be global struggles. And while they would take a national form, they would inevitably be against many of the same companies, which were international corporations, and involve workers uniting on a global scale. I think we're beginning to see that.
I want to, because, hey, I can admit it, I've probably wrongly stated this before, you know, railing about, oh, you're sending the jobs to Mexico and China, this and that. But something you guys have been saying, and socialists, is this is a strategy by General Motors and the UAW to pit, you know, U.S. workers versus Mexican workers versus other countries, and it's actually, you're looking at the wrong thing. Can you kind of talk about why we need solidarity with Mexican workers?
I mean, look, there's no such thing as a Mexican car, or an American car, or a German car. The cars have 30,000 parts in it, produced by workers all over the globe. Not to mention those who mined and you know, develop the raw materials. So corporations, transnational corporations, and that was a phenomenon that developed in the 80s and the 90s. It used to be where there were just multinational companies. So if it was a GM factory in Brazil, it produced for the Brazilian market. Transnational production meant in the production of a single commodity, there was the work was distributed in many, many, many countries. So that gave the capitalists the ability to constantly distribute production, shift production wherever they can get the highest rate of profit. So when the trade unions were confronted with that, you know, they are rooted in the national market, in the national labor pool. So their response to that was, don't shift production to another country. We'll voluntarily lower labor costs in our country in order to save our capitalists and make our capitalists more competitive. Meanwhile, the unions like the UAW carried out a vicious, racist, anti-Japanese campaign in the 1980s that led to the tragic death of a Chinese American by the name of Vincent Chin in 1982, who was beaten to death by a Chrysler foreman and his unemployed stepson. And so the issue of the international unity of the working class isn't some kind of, you know, utopia or something that you only save for holiday speechifying. It's a strategic question. You can't fight global corporations, globally organized corporations, on a national scale. It's like saying we're going to fight General Motors only in Michigan, but they have operations in Ohio, Illinois, and so on, and they move it. So the issue of the practical unity of the working class, the establishment of links of communication, coordination, is a life and death matter for workers. And that's why I encourage your listeners to watch this video of the striking Matamoros workers. They work for a company called Fisher, which is actually based in Michigan. You know, but of course it pays 75 cents an hour to these workers there. They rebelled against their unions. In fact, one of the first things the Matamoros workers did was they marched to the U.S. border, and they said, "Gringos, wake up! Americans, wake up!"
Was that the caravan that Trump was talking about?
Well, actually, that caravan was one of their slogans are "We are international workers," and all the vicious anti-immigrant baiting, which of course the Democrats fully support. I mean, they've just cut a deal with Trump on the issue of the wall and so forth. They all want to divide the working class. They all want to promote nationalism, the lie that because everybody is the same you know, all Americans, that somehow we all have the same class interests. Excuse me, an American worker has a hell of a lot more in common with a Mexican worker than he does with Mary Barra or an American or you know, Bill Gates or Warren Buffett or any of these people. And it goes, and this is a class struggle. It isn't an issue of gender. It isn't an issue of race. You want to see, you know, you got women running. Mary Barra runs General Motors. Is that a great advance for womanhood? No. She's a capitalist. She's ruthlessly attacking the jobs of men and women, throwing them into poverty. So the issue is the working class has to be united, and it has to be done on an international scale.
I just want to read by the way, I haven't been being rude. I want to bring in some comments from the viewers. One viewer said, working class internationalism, one global working class united and coordinated, a global workers' army to wage the class war. So a lot are digging what you're saying.
Well, this is, I agree with the sentiments by your readers here. And I'm glad that they're making such statements, as a matter of fact, because they are our greatest ally. They're not our enemies. In fact, the UAW and Unifor right now have launched a proposal for boycotting all Mexican cars. And this is the first time the UAW and Unifor has gotten together on anything. I mean, they split some 30-some years ago over nationalism and over who can offer the companies the highest, the most concessions and keep the jobs.